Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. A most excellent episode for you. We're going to interview Brooke Story and Dave Hickey of BD. We're going to be talking about their diagnostics business, how things worked during COVID and how things look going forward. Great conversation with the two of them. I particularly enjoyed the origin stories. Dave Hickey's brought back some memories. Also excited to have Paul Grand, the CEO of Medtech Innovator, on the program. Paul will be taking part in the Newmarker's Newsmakers. So it was great to have him in our rundown of the highlights of the week. And Paul also told us about an important deadline coming up for Medtech Innovator. I'll spoil a little bit. The deadline is February 15th. You've heard the date. Paul will explain the significance in this episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. Finally, once again, Paul will be at Device Talks Boston. He'll be running a Medtech Innovator track. Got a lot of great details in this podcast about what is coming up. And the sessions look great. The agenda looks great. Go to devicetalks.com to see what we have planned. I'll tell you some more details a little later in the podcast, but I'll tell you this detail now. Register and you can save yourself a boatload of money. Use this very special podcast code DTW. That stands for Device Talks Weekly. So DTW 25. And that will save you 25% off the price of registration. Once again, go to devicetalks.com to check it out. Now let's get into this episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Good to be here, Tom. How's it going, man?
It's going great. It's a little crowded here in the Device Talks Weekly studio. We have our first guest to take part in the Newmarker's Newsmakers.
Wow. It's always great when we got a first.
That's right. We have our number one fan. He was our 100,000th listener, so we brought him in. No, we don't actually know that for sure.
100,000.
He's Paul Grand of the Medtech Innovator. Paul, welcome.
Hey, guys. Great to be here.
Great to have you. How was the green room? Did you enjoy the mimosas and
the snacks? The snacks were great. It definitely exceeded expectations. Nice job, guys.
We like to take care of our guests, so it's great. It's great to have you here. We're going to.
It was nice that you went out of the way and stopped at Costco like before this, Tom. It was good.
That's right. I got the goldfish and the tiny bottles of water. I know those are Paul's favorite.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
So we're going to walk through the Newmarker's Newsmakers, but we're also going to get an update from you. The Medtech Innovator has been incredibly busy, and we're incredibly busy in 2022. In fact, you're working with us on Device Talks Boston. Really excited about that.
Excited to be at Device Talks Boston. I got that. We'll get a lot to talk about. I'm not going to spoil it now.
Before we get into Newmarker's Newsmakers, Paul, we had you on the podcast once before, and I don't think I asked you the question. How did you get into MedTech? What was your first MedTech gig?
Oh, my first MedTech gig was a medical device company where I was one of the co-founders, and that was an ablation device for neurosurgery to help go after patients who had metastatic brain tumors. So I did that in partnership with Keith Black, who's a world-renowned neurosurgeon, and it was his technology. And I just helped, put the business together. That got me into my start into MedTech.
Wow. So you were one of those CEOs, those startup CEOs scrambling for cash and trying to make it all work. That was you.
That was me. I knew what it was like to be on that side of the table many times. I actually started 8 different companies. And that one in medtech, another one in biopharma, and a bunch of tech companies. And that got me my start in medtech. And, I never looked back.
That's fantastic. And I know you and I met when you were at RCT and you were doing investing there. You were on the other side of the table. And then you created Medtech Innovator. Tell us about the inspiration that got you to start Medtech Innovator and share with our audience exactly what Medtech Innovator does.
Sure. Yeah. So that transition from entrepreneur to MedTech Innovator had something in between, which I'll just briefly mention, which was that one of the investors in the biopharma company was RCT Ventures, as you mentioned. And RCT noticed that I was getting a little bored of sitting around watching our drug screening guys work and reporting at each board meeting how there was nothing to report. And they said, hey, you want to come help us out with some of our other portfolio companies? Which I did. And then they said, why don't you just join the firm? So I joined RCT. I thought I'd be in a VC for like a year and learn that business and then jump out and run another company. But 12 years later, I was still there because VC is a great job, as you guys, I think, probably know. It's a terrific job for many reasons, one of which is that you get to see a lot of stuff and you get to meet a ton of people. And it's really nice not to be out there, as you said, begging for money and banging on doors. It's a lot nicer to have the money. So I was in that enviable position for, as I said, close to 12 years. And along the way, we went through a financial crisis where we saw lots of people stop funding early stage med tech. You know, all those brand names that you and I used to meet, Tom and Chris, where, we used to be out there and we'd see all these funds. And they all disappeared, right? They all just left the game after 2010. And RCT continued investing in that space. We were, it was like the Forrest Gump after the hurricane comes through and the shrimp was aplenty. Yeah. We didn't have that problem anymore. All of a sudden, the pickings were great, and RCT was no longer losing deals to other firms, and that was fantastic. But I just started observing all these innovators out there who were no longer going to the conferences. Like I remember saying to Casey McGlynn, we were at JP Morgan in 2013, and I said, where are the innovators at? You look around and they weren't going to his conference in the way they used to. They weren't showing up at JPM and a bunch of other places because the money wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And I said, and he's like, what are we going to do about that? And I said, I don't know. Why don't we start like an American Idol for medical technology? And he said, that sounds great. And so
that's right. You were
awesome.
Medtech Idol initially, right?
Year one was Medtech Idol. Exactly. And so that was the genesis in 2013. We did that at his conference in June. And then at the end of that event, which went incredibly well, David Kasich came running over and said, hey, you got to do this at my conferences. And so I said, sure, of course. And so we did that at his San Francisco conference, and then the Dublin conference, which is where I met you for the first time, Tom. Yep. And that's when, we started the conferences. We started the accelerator in 2015 because we recognized that there was a huge gap in support for medical innovators. It wasn't just about having competitions and giving people, a small check, that there was this major gap in advice, I would say, in good guidance. That's the thing that I observed, I think, more than anything else, is that people were still funding early stage med tech, but the people who were funding it no longer knew anything about bringing products to market. It was with the early stage smart institutional investors gone, what was left was a bunch of angels and people who had, kind hearts, and they wanted to make an impact. But boy, they were making terrible mistakes in the guidance they were giving these companies and saying hey, you should put out your MVP and quickly iterate and, just stuff that you can't do in medtech. And just so they made a lot of mistakes, and Medtech Innovator was designed to basically make sure the really great companies don't fail for the wrong reason. They got the right need, they got the right technology, they got a team, they got all sorts of things going for them, and they make all these mistakes for the wrong reasons. And Medtech Innovator's Accelerator is designed to fix that and to make it so that these companies actually reach patients and that they get there with the maximum value possible.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing, is you're combining the money with, the advice and the support they need so they don't do stupid things, basically.
Basically, that's it, Chris.
So talk about your impact. What does your portfolio look like? And do you have a measure as to what has happened after they've become part of your portfolio in terms of fundraising success? Yeah,
look, we have lots of measures. Fundraising success has got to be one of them because it's, one of the easiest things that you can look at as a KPI. And we have, at this point, since inception, 420 companies that have graduated Medtech Innovators cohorts, which are now a U.S. program focused on companies in the U.S. market, our Asia program for companies that want to enter the Asia markets. And we just most recently added a biotools program for life science tools companies. That was our first year last year doing that. But 420 companies have since, graduating Medtech Innovator, gone on to raise $4 billion in follow-on funding, of which is amazing, wow. Right? That number is huge. That deserves a wow. Thank you. Wow.
Wow.
And the amazing thing is, as I said, we started in 2013. So that's, 9 years of work. And of that 4 billion, 50% of that $2 billion was last year alone.
Wow.
So,
Wow. 2 Fs. Those are legitimate wows.
It's like Carl Sagan levels you're talking about here. It's great.
It's
awesome.
So, 2021, $2 billion in funding for our portfolio companies. I pulled out the Silicon Valley report Silicon Valley Bank report that John Norris and team puts together every year. And, that's just fresh, off the presses a couple of weeks ago. And, and he reported the numbers and said, for 2021, there was $8.8 billion in funding for medtech. And I do the quick back of the envelope math. That means that, more than 25% of the funding is going to our portfolio. So I feel pretty good about that. I feel pretty good about that. We've got a stellar portfolio of companies.
That's fantastic.
And look, it doesn't hurt that we're unbelievably choosy about who we take. We got about a 4% acceptance rate. Last year, 1,800 companies applied to Medtech Innovator, and we accepted 85 of those. So we're pretty picky when it comes to that. The companies that we accept. And a little secret that not everybody knows is that ultimately the people who are deciding which companies get accepted are our corporate partners. Of which we have, over 27 or something corporate partners right now. Companies like J&J and Olympus and Nipro Medical and Edwards Lifesciences, many others, Dexcom. These are all our corporate partners. And, what we run is not just a typical accelerator where you've got like a local ecosystem in Texas or wherever it might be, where you're trying to find great companies to help the local economy. We have no regional affiliation. We're just trying to find the best companies in the world. And our corporate partners are the ones who ultimately raise their hand and say, I want to work with that company. And if they don't raise their hand and say that, we don't pick the company.
Nice.
So, it does mean that, there are some great companies that are getting left on the cutting room floor as well, to use our Hollywood terms here. But we are definitely getting the best of the best of the best.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, we're excited to have you at Device Talks Boston. We'll talk about that program in a bit. We're going to roll into the Newmarker's Newsmakers. But first, Paul, I didn't tell you we'd be doing this, but I'm going to test you. I know you're a fan of the podcast. You listen to it at 1.5 speed as you run. I wanted to test your knowledge of our podcast. I've got a little quiz here for you. We'll have a few questions here. So the first question is, in what types of food is pumpkin flavor acceptable, Paul? Is it beer? Okay. Is it sausage? Or this is per Tom and Chris, so you have to know our preferences. Or is it breads and muffins?
I'm going with sausage.
Oh.
Am I wrong?
No, we don't like pumpkin sausage.
Here, I'm sorry. I always hear you say pumpkin sausage. And I equate those two things together, but I'm going. I had it in my head. Okay. I just had the wrong. I was on the blind. I'm sorry. I was on the flip. But
slow the podcast down, Paul. You need to listen to it at 1x. No more 1.5.
Exactly. By the way, I should have pointed this out before. It is mine. It's blowing my mind right now to have you guys talking at such a slow speed. So
we will try to speed it up.
I feel like I'm compensating by talking really fast. I'm used to you guys talking faster. I'm sorry I missed the question, but I'll get the next one.
You've got 2 more chances to redeem yourself.
All right.
Chris Newmarker, let us roll into number 5 on the vaunted Newmarker's Newsmakers list.
All right. Number 5 on the list, we've got Medtronic, another like FDA announcing another a class 1 level recall out of Medtronic. So this is like the 3rd time this year that Medtronic FDA has classified a Medtronic related recall as class 1. This time around, it's their Hawk 1 system. It's a directional arthrectomy system, and there've been about 163 complaints, 55 reported injuries to date. No related deaths, but here's just hoping that Medtronic's working through the recalls, and we'll see less of these going forward.
No, for sure, no doubt they're looking at this. I just want to confirm. So the FDA has confirmed 3 class 1 recalls specifically for Medtronic. They're all for Medtronic, right?
Yeah, right. This year, so far just for January.
So I'm looking at the article now. So the Puritan Bennett 980 series ventilator, and the Synergy Cranial and Stealth Station S7 cranial software.
Yeah, so those were the two earlier this year, and they had a good batch of them last year, and plus there's been a scrutiny of Medtronic's diabetes business from FDA as well. So just here's helping. We're finally weking through this stuff.
All right, well, let's move on to number 4, Chris. Bring the mood up a little bit. What do you got at number 4?
Yeah, right. Well, number 4.
Come on, man.
List, sorry, man. I mean, Edwards Lifesciences, they missed on their Q4 earnings. And the big reason is Omicron. They were talking about how it's been, it's had a pronounced impact on hospital resources that they mostly saw in December. But I mean, that's something else that you would see. COVID's not just affecting elective procedures like knee surgeries. I mean, there's people who need heart valves who aren't able to get them right now. So just really stresses. I think our listeners are pretty scientific people. They're vaccinated, but if you know anybody who isn't, encourage them to get vaccinated, encourage them to get a booster, because it's not just yourself you're protecting, but you're if you're potentially exposing other people, stressing our healthcare system. People who needed healthcare aren't getting it right now.
And even as Omicron fades, I suspect we'll see a crunch on the healthcare system as people try to get procedures done that they've had to put off. So.
I was just reading, I think it was in the New York Times today, and in Britain, they're starting to see people who've delayed healthcare, coming in with 2 advanced cancers, heart problems. I mean, we need to get this fixed.
Get vaccinated. Paul,
get vaccinated.
You were talking earlier about starting off at Wilson Sonsini's conference, and now your other conferences. You'll be at Device Talks Boston. We're excited about getting together in person. How have you fared the last 2 years with your pitch contests and doing them virtually, and how excited are you about hopefully getting back together again in person?
Boy, I'll tell you, I am so excited to get back to being in person for these events because they are so social in their nature. If we just wanted to read business plans and if we just wanted to do, video interviews, I think it would be a very different program. We worked really hard in 2020 and 2021 to deliver, the same level of quality and the same kind of experience for our companies. But that was a lot more work. It was probably twice as hard to do this virtual, I would say, because look, it's a totally different experience getting together in person and hanging out and getting to know people than just seeing them pitch on a screen in a little box. And, and that whole, a big part of what we do is, do we like these people? Because there, as I said, there's hundreds of people that are qualified to be in Medtech Innovator, and we're only taking 80 or 90 of them, right? So of those hundreds of people, some of the ones that we're not taking are because we just don't think they're a good fit for us. So, like we say, they're not going to take our guidance. They're not that open to feedback. They don't really, maybe they're trying to win the prize, but they don't really want to be in the program. And the people who go through the program will tell you the program is the prize, not just the cash awards.
Yeah.
And so we want people who want to be there. So going to do this in person is so important. And our partners who travel with us, we are like, I use the American Idol analogy. We travel with our partners to all these different cities. We'll bring them to, in an average year, 7 different cities to meet with innovators in Minneapolis and other places, in Boston, wherever. And we rotate the cities, and it's a lot of fun. And everyone really enjoys it, and it's a big part of the process. So to do that on Zoom required double the number of times, double the number of meetings, because we couldn't keep people on Zoom for a day the way we can keep them in person for a day. It's too hard to sit in front of your screen. So we had to stretch that out over like 14 pitch events. It's just a lot to ask of people. So I want to be back.
And I suspect, you do all that work and then you're still missing out. One of the things that I like the best about conferences is just like accidentally like striking up a conversation with somebody and being like, wow, I'm glad I met this person. This is somebody I didn't know, like is really knowledgeable and, has some really cool insights about stuff. You're missing out on all that without a live event.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the deals, like we always say, like deals get done on our road tour at those pitch events, regardless of whether we take somebody into Medtech Innovator. People get funding. People call us afterwards. They're like, that was amazing. Because we'll have like 90 judges at each one of our pitch events. It's not like we have 4 people who are making decisions. We have 90 judges who are investors, strategics, clinicians, sometimes people from the FDA and other places join in. They're all there. They're meeting each other, and they're like hospital systems, payers will be there, and people come out and they go, I just got to deal with somebody. Thank you very much. It doesn't matter whether or not we make it into Medtech Innovator. This was enough alone. And it's harder to do that on Zoom. Let's just say.
I can't wait to get back to that environment myself. And I'm looking forward to give us a little pitch. I'm looking forward to our Device Talks shows, getting going later this year as well. So it'll be great.
So who are we going to see on stage? What type of company are we going to see on stage May 10th and 11th at Device Talks Boston? Who are you bringing?
Yeah. So we're, for anyone who doesn't know, as you just mentioned, Device Talks Boston is the event we're going to use this year for our mid-stage companies. And what that means is, of the companies applying to Medtech Innovator, a lot of people don't realize this either. People will say, oh, I've already raised my Series A, so I guess I'm too late for Medtech Innovator. No, 90% of the people in Medtech Innovator have raised a Series A. And probably about 40% have raised a Series B.
Wow.
So we actually take companies that are more mature than you would think. And they still have a lot to do. A lot of this is value and market access and things that, will determine whether these companies are successful down the road.
Yeah.
And so the mid-stage companies, we take about half the companies each year at Medtech Innovator are what I call mid-stage. So usually they've raised a Series B already, and they're on to, their clinical. And in fact, a large number of companies are clinical in Medtech Innovator, but these companies especially are clinical. They may be on the market already. So the mid-stage companies, that's the place that we're going to be inviting them to present will be Device Talks. So we'll have a day that we're going to spend with our 90 evaluators and 30 of those companies. They'll be all meeting together. We have a whole partnering system where we partner up groups of judges who all like the same companies to meet with companies. So that'll all be happening. And we're going to do that and flip-flop them during the day. So like there'll be a morning session of that. And then the rest of the time they'll be at Device Talks. And then we'll flip-flop that with like our afternoon session who will go to Device Talks. So they'll all get to be both, meeting all of our ecosystem and all the judges and, investors and others, and they'll get to be at Device Talks, which is really cool. We haven't announced all the details here yet. So this is, debut news, but we're going to have a competition at Device Talks where we will be selecting at least 4 of the companies. Sometimes we can't help ourselves and choose 5, but at least 4 of those companies will get selected to compete for a prize during the Device Talks conference, on the stage, and the Device Talks audience will pick the winner. So, lots of fun stuff. All those companies will be showcasing. So 30 unbelievably high caliber, high tier companies will be showcasing during Device Talks.
That's awesome.
So
that's really exciting.
Excited about that.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you there. I'd reached out to you when I first got here. I think we were doing Device Talks Minnesota in 2020. We're going to have you help us out there. And of course that didn't work.
No.
But this is almost better to have you on this bigger stage, and we're all ready and raring to go. So it should be a great event.
Can't wait. Be there or be square.
Hey everybody, Tom here. Just taking a quick break from this episode to we'll tell you a couple of things. Number one, Paul says he knew the sausage answer. He just pushed the button too soon, and well, that happened. So we'll give him a pass on that one. He's obviously a loyal listener, as you'll hear later on the podcast. Number two, we are extremely excited to have Paul and Medtech Innovator at Device Talks Boston. Also extremely excited to be working with Abbott, Boston Scientific, Medtronic, Stryker, and DePuy. They are putting together content that will help illustrate problems they've faced and solutions that they've found. It's really going to be a discussion as to how we can move forward as a sector over those 2 days. And it's great to have their participation in the program. So I honestly don't think you'll want to miss this. Please go to devicetalks.com to register. Registration is open. Check out the agenda. And when you do register, please use the code DTW25 to save 25%. So find 4 of your friends. Register all 5 folks, and one of you is attending for free. How is that? That sounds pretty damn good, if you ask me. So it'll be great to see you there in Boston. Go to devicetalks.com. And while you're there, check out our upcoming lineup for Device Talks Tuesdays. We're going to be restarting that on February 8th. We have a great program put together by our sponsor, Spectrum, and it'll feature two folks who have been in the podcast just recently, Santosh Prabhu of Abbott and Stan Rowe of NXT Biomedical. We'll be talking about delivery systems for heart valves, and it'll be a great conversation. Find more details at devicetalks.com. Please do register. I have no code for that because registration is free. Just sign up. You're going to get a great conversation from some leaders in the space. That's it. Now let's get back to this episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. Chris Newmarker, bring up number 3 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list.
Number 3 on the list, we've got surgical robot maker Distal Motion raising $90 million in a Series E financing round led by Revival Healthcare Capital. But the Swiss company, they're planning to use the funding to support global commercialization of their Dexter surgical robot. And Dexter received a CE mark approval in Europe in December 2020. And this is a laparoscopic surgery robot. They see it being used in general gynecological and urological surgeries. Just another, and robotic surgery is just a hot space. I mean, it's just so dominated by Intuitive just like even a decade ago, and now we're seeing big companies like Medtronic and J&J looking to get in, and we're just seeing all these like smaller companies with all these different cool ideas like raising money, looking to do some neat stuff in the space.
I spoke with the CEO, Michael Friedrich, on Monday. We're going to have him up on a podcast in a couple of weeks. And the real differentiating factor between Dexter and the other surgical systems is this one stays in the surgical field. So the surgeons don't have to move in and out to work it. And it really is a smaller profile, a lower profile. And they think there's an opportunity to really create a market where Intuitive and the other big players don't operate. So really, it's an interesting play, and definitely one of those companies where you hear the story, like, okay, I can see how that fits into the larger surgical robotic landscape. So very, very interesting company to watch.
Yeah, I've seen, by the way, as a fan of your podcast, an avid listener, you guys have done unbelievable coverage on surgical robotics and all the players in the space. And I can tell you, having this kind of unique lens of what the innovation landscape, there are some amazing ones that we all haven't heard of yet that are coming, and some that have been in Medtech Innovator. There's Neosis as well, and the dental side is really kind of cool. If you guys have heard of them, but a really cool company in the implant space. So it's not just the laparoscopic and some of the other things we've all been looking at, and then also there's a bunch of, like, as I said, kind of stealth laparoscopic, not just laparoscopic, but robotic surgery companies coming that, as I said, are applying to Medtech. And I've already seen and read through their applications. Boy, this space, this is one to keep watching and one to be very excited about. There's some really cool technology coming.
That's awesome. I know you say it's a lot of work, and I'm sure it is, but it's got to be fun to go through these proposals and see what people are up to and the technology they're developing.
It is. It's really, that's, I mentioned before, the best part of being a VC always was just seeing so much innovation. And, Medtech Innovator, boy, talk about scratching an itch. I mean, I have, as I said, 1,800 companies applying last year. That's a lot to look at. And I read every single application.
I mean, from your perspective, what has you most excited about robotic surgery right now? I mean, what are you hoping they really are able to accomplish with this technology? Well,
it's the precision, obviously, I think is the thing that, a lot of people think about, is just being able to, make surgeons great, every surgeon great, have a repeatable, really, really incredible procedure for every patient. And so that's really good, just upping the game for surgeons, everywhere. And then the data, being able to capture all that data and be able to understand and analyze it and see what worked and why. And there's all these nuances that people tell us about that you would never know about if it wasn't for all the data that's coming out of these instruments now. So being able to say, like, what made a good procedure? What was it, both the pre-procedure data, the during the procedure, intra-procedure, being able to have all of that data and now holistically use it, and understand how that impacts outcomes, that's going to change everything. And then even, you had this on your podcast on the last one, I think it was, where they're talking about orthopedics and robotics, and, and just just like, I don't know if it was totally appreciated. I was listening to that interview that, because someone was talking about the number of procedures that they would, people were doing in a day before and how many they can do now. Orthopedics is, for many people, right? It's like wood shop. These guys are in there like with sledgehammers, effectively like pounding away. And I talk to surgeons, all the time who are exhausted. It's not just, are they as good after the third procedure? Like physically, it's exhausting. And the idea that you could have a robot assisting in that and completely change the game is amazing. And even as you mentioned, having people out of the field, out of the radiation fields in many cases and things that so many things robotics can offer now that, as I said, I'm all about giving, improving outcomes for patients, right? That's what I think why we wake up and do this every day.
I'm excited because it really sounds like a great equalizer. Lord forbid I need a surgery, I don't have to worry, is the surgeon tired, is it getting toward his nap time and he worked too hard, this will equalize things, and and people will have to worry less about which hospital am I going to, which who's handling the surgeon. I mean, if you're in the know, I mean, if you need something like that, you're really looking for the most skilled surgeon imaginable. And hopefully the robotics will make sure we have a lot more really skilled surgeons, doing work. So that's very exciting.
Right. Hopefully it'll have the guardrails to stop the back, because it's still just a tool, right? And
exactly.
Whether the surgeon is just average with a robot doesn't mean that the procedure is still going to go well. So, it's the guardrails kinds of stuff, I think, that are also really exciting. There's a whole bunch of stuff in that space where these devices, as you said, Chris, are getting better and better at stopping.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Even something like, Smith & Nephew's Corey robot, which, just got an indication for hip surgery. But I mean, its robotic piece is the tool. And, it's inside the surgery tool. It's the burr. It'll, you paint the area where you're going to do the work, and it'll stop when you're outside of it. So, I mean, it's just, really, as you said, it's like a guardrail. It's keeping the surgeon from, making a mistake, which is great.
Yeah. And some of these things are giving them vision in various ways where they're able to stop penetrating too far and, hitting a vessel or hitting a nerve or something else that, would have just been, unavoidable before in many cases. And now we can stop that. So, yeah.
I was thinking about that Active Surgical with their visualization system. It's kind of, they see it as a Waze for surgery, sort of a real GPS system. So it's going to be interesting to see where all this technology moves. Let us move on, Chris, to number 2 on the Newsmakers list. And then, Paul, I know you have a deadline that you want to let people know about. So what's number 2, Chris?
Hey, well, number 2 on the list, we have, this was earnings week this week. And, it has not been a great earnings season, so far. And, I think it's, the big news has just been, the effect that Omicron had on procedures near the end of the year. But, we also had, Philips, they were missing in the fourth quarter, and the big reason was, the Respironics recall, the major recall they've been going through with their sleep devices and problems with sound abatement foam, which has really knocked them out of the market for now. But that they took a hit on that in Q4, and they were also talking about the supply chain problems that we're hearing about from a lot of companies. So hopefully Philips is able to work through these problems, and we can have a better 2022.
Yeah, we talked about the chip shortage before. Paul, were you the one who posted once on LinkedIn about? No, it was Mick Farrell, but that Medtech should get a priority in the supply of chips. Because have you seen any impact on the folks you talk to who are making these high-tech devices but just don't have the materials they need to move it forward? Have we reached that point yet from your perspective?
Oh, yeah. No, we're definitely seeing that impact. Yeah. So the couple of things I'll say in this. One is that I talk to these innovators all the time. I just talked to one right before this from our portfolio. And I asked them the question, okay, so you get your device approved and, you do your early validation study and now you're on the market and you say, great, we're going to do X, million in revenue we're projecting for next year. Do you have the device, the supply, the components to be able to deliver on your revenue projections? And almost all of the answers are like, well, with supply chain disruption, we're expecting a delay. Almost in every case, because they go, oh yeah, we've got enough for 500 units or 200 units or 400 units. And I go, well, what if you get 2,000 orders? And they're like, well, we'll deliver half of those or we'll deliver, a quarter of those, and then we'll hope to get the rest. And, and they're trying they're trying to do things to get access to chips and other things, but they're struggling. I mean, there's no question there is a major impact on supply chain, especially people with custom components. They just can't count on stuff showing up when it needs to be here. And they're getting outbid constantly by other people. So it's affecting people for sure. It's going to affect the ability for startups to go from approval to market to, scale. That's going to be an impact. And no one has any visibility on when that's going to get better. So that's something to be aware of. And then secondly, one of our partners had a great comment, which a recommendation. This is from Jabil, who's the largest manufacturer of medical devices in the world. And their advice was tear apart your iPhone, tear apart, your other devices that are like an iPhone, your Android phones, and try and only use those components in your devices because we know those things are going to be available.
Wow.
So like as much as possible, use components that we know will be widely available and will have long life versus, stuff that's all unavailable and coming to end of life soon. So some good advice there from the folks at J.
Yeah, that's good advice.
All right, before we roll onto number one, I want to hit you again with the Device Talks weekly quiz. So let's see if you can save some face here. This one, I'm sure you'll get. So we've got Chris Newmarker. He's, let's see.
I can tell you his Twitter handle. He's a Newmarker.
That was actually going to be one of mine. So I was actually considering that as one of the questions. So I should have put that for you. Hold on. All right. So Chris is living in Minnesota. Where does Chris Newmarker vacation with the family? Is it the Backham Museum? Does he like to hang out at the Mayo Clinic with the kids? Or is he at the lake?
At the lake.
There you go.
Yeah, it's Minnesota.
It's Minnesota. Where else would he be? All right. Good job. You got a point on the board.
All right.
And one thing I love here is you ask anybody and they never say like, oh, I am, heading up to like Mille Lacs or I'm heading up to like, there's always just like, I'm headed up to the lake. Everybody's heading up to the lake.
Everyone's going to the lake. I don't know which lake that is, but
there's a lot of them. So
I've heard there's 10,000.
We should count them someday. What's your big deadline coming up? I know folks who are interested in participating in the program, some of them at least have to get on the stick. What's the deadline coming up?
Yeah, that is important. So our deadline is February 15th. You have 2 weeks, if you're listening to this podcast, roughly 2 weeks to get your application in. Applications take, I don't know, if you've ever raised money, if you've ever done a presentation, it'll probably take you an hour to pull together what we need for the application. If you haven't, then it might take you a little longer, a couple hours to answer the questions, but that's it. It doesn't take a lot of work. You go to medtechinnovator.org, www.medtechinnovator.org, either one. And you'll see a link at the top to apply, click that, register, go through the process. It's totally worth it. Even if you don't get accepted into Medtech Innovator, every application is read by at least 3 people who generally comprise a manufacturer, one of the large manufacturers, like a J&J or Olympus or others, an investor. Maybe I saw in that Distal Motion story, 415 Capital was one of the investors. They're one of our reviewers, as among many others. So you're going to get read by investors. And then offered clinicians. I'll be part of that as well, too, like KOLs. So every application gets reviewed. You get on somebody's radar. It's easy to do. MedTechInnovator.org. February 15th is the deadline. Do not be late. And please don't apply on February 15th. We usually get half of our applications on the final day. And that is, if you do that, that's fine. But my preference is that you apply sooner. So as soon as you hear this, go back to your desk, pull out your laptop and go to Medtech Innovator and do your application.
To be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late. To be late is to be left.
Yes, that's right, Chris.
So who should not apply? What is the earliest stage that you'll take? If I'm just a person with a dream and a PowerPoint presentation, should I submit or do I need to have some kind of data?
If you're a dream and a PowerPoint, this is not the right program for you. We are not looking for starry-eyed people who say like, boy, I wish I could cure cancer. And I have a dream about how to do that. That's wonderful, but that's not Medtech Innovator yet. What we're looking for are people who have a company. So, you could be emerging from a university, but you got to have a team. You need to have a company. It's a requirement to have a company. So that's number one. You have to have a prototype of some kind. That could be software. If you're a digital company, it could be a hardware device, whatever that is. We need some kind of a prototype, and we need some kind of evidence that this actually is going to work. In some cases, that might be historical evidence that you're riding on where someone did something very similar and now you're better at it. And you can point to their clinical data and say, look, it's working for them. We're doing this faster and more efficiently or less invasively, and it's going to do the same thing. But in most cases, we want your data. We want you to show us some bench data, some animal data, some cadaver or human data to say, look, this thing we're doing actually works. And then we can evaluate it. Otherwise, it might as well just be a dream. So, we want you to be at that stage. And as I said, you have to have a team. That team could be one person, but we prefer it's multiple people. And they need to be around because we're going to be giving you a lot of advice, a lot of guidance, setting up a bunch of meetings with important people. And if that team is not the team who's going to be there to continue for at least the next, series of milestones, at least the next year, then what's the point of our doing that? So you got to have that team in place and the ability to execute on those milestones. You should have some funding, not a ton of funding, but it's not an issue. But you got to have the ability to execute on your milestones. Those are the key criteria that we're looking for. And we take everything except for biopharma. So if you're developing a small molecule, not for us. If you're developing a biologic, not for us. However, drug delivery, drug discovery, some of those other things are certainly in play as well, too. But that's what we're looking for. And last thing I'll mention, as I said before, the corporate partners are a huge part of Medtech Innovator. So we're looking for things that they're looking for. So if you're doing something that nobody is interested in, meaning like there's literally no path to a corporate partner, it's going to be harder to get into Medtech Innovator, but I really haven't met one of those yet. So, I think for the most part, we have such great coverage of corporate partners. There's something for everybody in the game. Last thing I'll mention is that we are not just a device focused accelerator. We talked about that before, MedTech, anything that's regulated by CDRH is MedTech. So that could be, all the software stuff that's MedTech as well. So health tech, MedTech, that's what we're looking for. And an interesting piece of the data that we found in our survey with Deloitte last year, looking at all the companies that applied, out of the companies, only 19% of them were focused on a treatment of disease. So actually over 80% of the applicants to Medtech Innovator are doing something other than treating disease. It's the prevention, it's the clinical decision support, it's the diagnostic, it's the remote patient care afterwards, the acute follow, not just the acute, but the follow-up. It's all that other stuff is 80% of the people that are out there developing technology. And these aren't, again, the applicants are pretty self-selecting. They've raised money. The applicants to Medtech Innovator had raised over $4 billion last year already. So, pre-Medtech Innovator. So,
well, that's exciting too. It's nice to see we're trying to improve healthcare overall in general. I mean, what's the point if you can replace somebody's hip if they don't get cared for properly afterward and they fall down again and they have to go back and get another hip. That's
and a lot of these medtech companies, as are going at risk these days, so that if you do a surgical procedure or something else and there's a recurrence within some period of time, the device companies in some cases are on the line to actually, so we got to avoid that, right? Big part of this is stopping readmission, stopping recurrence of things post-acute. And I expect to see a lot more technology in that area. I mean, I'm seeing it, so I can tell you.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's great.
All right, great stuff. So the deadline again is February 14th. 15th.
Hey, no, you know what? But as Chris said, if you're on the 15th, you're late. So yes, February 14th, Valentine's Day.
I was trying to help everybody.
Is the deadline? Well, it's one day before.
That's right. He or she will understand if you're
tell your wife, tell your husband, I'm sorry, but I need to go take an hour and do the Medtech Innovator application.
Fantastic. All right, Chris, roll us into number one on the big Newmarker's Newsmakers list.
Hey, number one on the list is that Zimmo Biomet's ZimVie spinoff. It's moving forward. They filed the Form 10 registration statement with the SEC, and they still haven't given an exact date on when it's going to start trading, but they've filed to have the shares traded on the NASDAQ under the symbol ZIMV, and it's going to be a 2,600 employee company based in Westminster, Colorado. So it's an interesting trend. We've like we wrote about all these big, huge M&A deals. And now we're seeing like these giant conglomerates like splitting up. We've got, Zimmer Biomet spinning off its spine and dental businesses. We've got, GE Healthcare is going to be, going off on its own. J&J is breaking up. We had Siemens Healthineers get created a few years ago. It seems like, I've just been, covering the industry for a decade, but definitely looking at the longer term trend. I've heard people have been in here for a long time saying like it's like I'm thinking like amoeba or something, they all gobble up and get some larger thing and then it splits up again. It sounds like we're like, this is a cycle and we're like kind of in the splitting up phase. But Paul, from the perspective of, all these like startups that are like, hey, I want to get partnerships and work with a larger company and maybe potentially be acquired by them someday. What does this like trend like mean for them?
I think it's fantastic, because the thing that makes all of us nervous is consolidation. Less people to partner, less people to acquire, and that's not good. It's really not a good trend. So we like to see it going the other way. We like these divestitures. We like seeing new players in the space. And by the way, it's not just the big medtech companies. It's
better have more companies that you can potentially partner with.
We want more. And there's, and the private equity is buying companies. There's all sorts of people buying medtech companies now. So I like this trend, Chris. And I think the startups like it too. The more partners that are out there, the better.
Yeah, that's exciting. And the other thing I'm noticing too, which I suspect is probably good news, is I'm seeing a lot more, and we've seen a lot more IPOs. Whether SPACs are good or bad is debatable, but we're seeing more IPOs through those types of deals. I think when just even a few years ago, it seemed like if you were a startup and you're going to exit, you got acquired, and now there's like some different avenues.
Yeah, it's funny. Are we gonna get that SPAC attack sound effect in here?
We'll do it.
SPAC attack. SPAC attack.
There it is.
I got to tell you, the IPO thing is really incredible, SPAC or otherwise. Getting to the public markets, first of all, it's a lot to be a public company. So, it's not that I'm encouraging everybody to go be a public company. But I will say that, probably 3 years ago, when people would say, oh, and we're going to do, an acquisition or an IPO, everybody would roll their eyes at the IPO comment and go, okay, what are these guys smoking? Because that wasn't even in the cards. But boy, have things changed now. And the SPAC stuff is very real. And other companies are going public that I never thought would be public. So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to see that as an option.
Well, Dave Hickey and Brooke Story, welcome to the podcast.
Tom, great to be here.
Yeah, same, Tom. Very excited to get to talk to you today.
This is such an important topic. I've covered medtech. I always say this. I've covered medtech for a long time, but diagnostics has always been one of the sleepier spaces, and not anymore. You folks are rock stars. I bet you're are getting called from family members like Super Bowl, people looking for Super Bowl tickets. I bet, right? People looking for tests.
Yeah, every event, right? Like sporting events, family gatherings, holidays, Thanksgiving. You got it. You nailed it.
Yeah, and they don't realize that we don't have a secret stash of extra inventory hidden in our cars or our trunks or in our closets in our home, Tom. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks.
It's an unusual time. I was talking with someone else, another diagnostic maker who was at a conference, and they were getting more attention from non-medtech reporters than ever before, just because people became aware of the company's name, and it's a big company, just because of the diagnostic test. So I do want to get into your backgrounds. That's usually how we start these conversations. But in all seriousness, this is obviously a serious situation, and companies like BD have stepped up with the tools necessary to help us manage the pandemic as best as possible. But what have the past year and a half been like for BD and diagnostics? And Dave, we'll start with you, since you've been involved with the business throughout. And then Brooke, I'd love to get your perspective, having come in sort of in the middle. So Dave, what have the last 2 years, hard to believe, almost 2 years, been like?
Yeah, and if you think about it, we're in the third calendar year now, right? In terms of when this thing first started. So
Right.
honestly, I've just been very, very proud of the BD team and the response to just the pandemic. It's interesting when you talk about diagnostics, right? Because, probably what a lot of people don't know is that if you think about, like, we've probably all had blood tests taken, we've had urine tests, we've had swabs or whatever taken. And there's a very important stat that would say about 65 to 70% of clinical decisions are informed by a lab-based result, right? So for those of us in the industry, we have known the importance of diagnostics for a long, long time. But the broader community, the public don't, they have the sample taken and they wait for the result. But I think to your point, this last couple of years, it's really brought through COVID the role of diagnostics to the forefront of family living rooms, right? I mean, and media and so on. So, and I'm just, very proud of a broad BD team that has been in a position to respond to that. So, when we sensed, obviously, that COVID was here, and in my business, there was a need to develop these tests, we just put a group of people together, innovators, R&D, obviously helped by the FDA here in the United States, where they created this emergency use approach to commercializing rapid tests. And for the 2 years, that's been the whirlwind, right? And, whether it's been lab-based molecular tests or these rapid point-of-care tests, that really has been a huge focus for us over the past couple of years.
And Brooke, you came over to BD from Medtronic last year, so sort of during all of this. What was it about this opportunity that drew you here? And what was the transition like?
Well, yeah. Transitioning in a pandemic is always interesting, I would say. First of all, what drew me was kind of what Dave said. I've always been in healthcare. We'll talk about my background eventually, but I've been doing this for 25 years. And I really was drawn to, number one, the agility the company showed. And being a 120-year-old company, showing that type of agility and being able to maintain that agility in kind of shifting the business and getting these diagnostics into the market and reacting so quickly, I was truly impressed and intrigued and really excited about the opportunity. And so that's really what prompted it for me. And that's what's stayed and been impressed upon me over the last almost 9 months now, is just this agility of our business and the excitement around diagnostics. And like you said, Tom, I didn't know as much about it, but coming into an organization like this with so much expertise and depth in diagnostics in this organization, it's been a really great and fun transition.
That's fantastic. Well, let's go back to my typical format and dive a little more into your background. What was the first moment or the first experience that drew you into the medtech industry?
What happened with me, I started out my life as an industrial engineer on a muffler manufacturing shop floor in North Carolina.
Interesting. That's a new one.
Yeah, I figured. I was working for Andersen Consulting, or what's now Accenture, at the time in the early 90s. And I got staffed on a company that manufactured and distributed blood plasma products for hemophiliacs, and literally got the bug for healthcare at that point, really understanding the impact the HIV disease had on that population in the 80s. And when I was looking to transition away from consulting, just because I didn't want to travel full time, got married, started a family back in the late 90s, that's when I joined Johnson & Johnson. And I was there for about 5 years, realized I needed a business school degree because I had some gaps from a competency perspective as functional, right? Just really understanding a P&L and all of the decisions that I think influence how businesses are run. So I went to Michigan for grad school. And then when I left Michigan, I joined Medtronic back in 2006. And just have had I've been really blessed, frankly, with all of these great opportunities and working for organizations that are really doing great things in the world. And again, it's kind of what pulled me over to BD too, seeing what was going on here in diagnostics.
Absolutely. I can understand that. And Dave, how about yourself? What drew you to the medtech industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as we said at the beginning, I'm here in Baltimore, Maryland now, but you'll detect from my accent that I'm not a native Baltimorean, right? But so I'm from Manchester in the UK, and I always knew healthcare was my, North Star vocation. But what started me in the area of diagnostics and this side of medical device was I used to love a program on TV back in the UK called Quincy ME with Jack Klugman. He played the pathology program. And I knew nothing about pathology. So, I was at high school at the time, and I started doing a little bit of careers counseling and meeting with the career person before I went to university. And that convinced me. So when I went to Manchester University, I did clinical biochemistry, which is what all these blood tests are about and things like that. So then when I qualified out of biochemistry, I actually worked in the UK National Health Service as a biochemist for nearly 7 years, and then joined industry. I joined Siemens Healthcare at the time, and then very fortunate to sort of get an international assignment to Tarrytown, New York in 2003, still in healthcare. And then actually, was with that team, with that company till 2014, till I was brought into BD. So I've been with Becton Dickinson since 2014, always in healthcare, through the role of medical device, through the role of diagnostic testing. It's always been about protecting health and advancing health and just wanting to make an impact. And as I've gone through my career, I've just sort of focused on experiential growth and learning. So the great thing about coming to BD was the focus is on infectious disease. So I know biochemistry extremely well, and it's a great opportunity to learn a new area of medicine.
I have to say, Tom, I loved Quincy ME too. It was on the television here in the United States when I was a kid as well.
I watched it as well. And I have to say, there were a lot of other doctors' programs that might have inspired. It's interesting that a medical examiner's show was the one that lit your fire there, Dave. What was it about? Just a discussion of the science? I mean, it was a great show.
Yeah, it was the science of pathology, because I never sort of thought about doing medicine or anything like that. But I'd done a little bit of work around, like, what are blood tests? And I'd heard this term of hematology and things like this. And it was just a curiosity to know more. And it was just this, having an understanding through that program that there was this department in a hospital called the lab that did all these different tests to help doctors make a decision. And literally, all the way through finishing high school, going to uni, doing my undergrad in medical science, and literally for 30 years now, I've practiced medical science and never wavered. So
that's great. No, that's fantastic. And you're right. I think the path to a good career is to find the thing that inspires curiosity inside of you and really makes you want to learn and understand. So that certainly makes a great deal of sense. So you are now Executive Vice President and President of BD Lifesciences. It's one of 3 groups within BD. Tell us a bit about the BD Lifesciences group. Other than diagnostics, which we'll explore in a moment, what are the other components?
Yeah, so Life Sciences is one of 3 what we call segments that make up Becton Dickinson, the company. The other 2 segments are around medication management, or what we call medical segment, and the interventional segment. Life Sciences has got 3 components to it. So diagnostics, which I know we're going to talk about. Then there is the sort of point of care business, which is also diagnostics, but very much focused on testing done outside of the lab right now. So by definition, it's at the point of care. And then the third business unit there is what we call our bioscience business. And that really is a business focused. It's got clinical research and clinical diagnostics, but really focused on things like leukemia, lymphoma, oncology, HIV. And that business is really focused on understanding people's immune system.
Interesting. So let's now drill down on the diagnostic space. Brooke, give us a little overview of your offerings in diagnostics, other than COVID, because we'll talk about the COVID test, the BD Veritor at home test in a moment.
Yeah, and we really, like Dave said, I mean, a lot of our COVID is separated out. So we have kind of 3 segments within it, within our diagnostics business. First, specimen management, and that's the collection of the specimen to test. And so this even includes blood collection, urine, those types of things. That's a big business based up in New Jersey. That's part of us. And then the other 2 segments within IDS, I would say, one is microbiology. And so this is our BACTEC system, which is, phenomenal standard of care for blood culture. And then we also have lab automation as a part of that, as we see labs transitioning and really having a labor shortage of people that are qualified in labs. And we saw some of that with the COVID situation, right? Like, who's going to run all these tests? So we have lab automation, microbiology, and then we also have molecular. And our molecular business provides, we have both a high throughput, highly automated system for the molecular space as well. It's our core system. It's called BD Core. We just introduced it in the United States and it's been introduced in Europe already. So really excited about that. And then we have our BD Max, our acute setting kind of desktop molecular diagnostic as well. And a ton of fun stuff in the pipeline there. You'll hear a lot about molecular diagnostics, and that's kind of the chassis of the PCR testing that's going on right now. So that's the majority of it. Dave, did I miss anything?
That was well summarized. Your 9 months has been extremely well served.
Yeah, we should note, as we will in the write-up of the podcast, that Dave, you previously held the diagnostics position before Brooke came aboard, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So this is great. We get sort of a twofer in two perspectives on the diagnostic space. So Dave, take me back. Let's talk a bit about the COVID test, about BD Veritor at home. Take me back to March 2020 or early 2020. I don't know when did conversations start within BD that we need to come up with something to enable people to test things at home? When did those kind of conversations start?
Yeah, so that started more into the 21, really into 2021.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So, but to pick up on your point, Tom, so back in the March of 20, obviously we had sensed that we needed to develop just COVID tests and release these COVID tests into the market through what they call the FDA Emergency Use Authorization Program. And this was where, I said before, the team sort of got together, rallied together. We did rapid innovation, and we innovated both lab-based molecular tests, because at the time, a lot of the testing was being done in the lab. And then you might remember there was discussion around lab testing took a long time. It was 3 or 4 days, to wait before you got a result, and that wasn't great ideal. So we then moved to these point-of-care tests, but point-of-care tests on a small handheld device like the size of a cell phone. But they were still being done by a healthcare professional, etc. And of course, that was good for symptomatic people and so on. And then, of course, you realize as the pandemic really started to take hold, and there was this concept of the real, what if we could do a test at home, or a patient could do the test themselves? Because people may have been in contact, but they may have been asymptomatic and not shown any signs of COVID. And suddenly the whole dialogue changed so that it became a topic of public health surveillance rather than actual diagnostic testing of people that were symptomatic. And so that in 2021 started the dialogue for us around, we really should think about developing an at-home test. And specifically, when we developed that test, and as you've seen, the BD Veritor at-home test was the first smartphone-enabled test that actually is used to sort of digitally interpret and report the result. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. But it was interesting because when we designed this test deliberately, we were very much looking to answer the questions. Imagine yourself who's never done a diagnostic test before as a consumer at home. How do we take the fear out of it? How do we make it a robust test? So that, obviously what you would want to know as a user is, have I done the test properly? Have I collected the sample properly? Am I reporting the results properly? So we built some very deliberate human factors, usability factors into the design of that test.
That's totally true. I was testing my family prior to Christmas, and it wasn't your test. I wasn't able to get that one. I had another one, and I just reading the instructions. I'm like, did I do that for a minute? Did I do that for 10 minutes? Did I swab both nostrils? There's all this anxiety just centered around the test to make sure you get it exactly right. Dave, let's dig a little deeper into the use of the cell phone for your test. Why was that important?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Tom. And what we wanted to do was use the cell phone. And again, it's important to sort of say that the cell phone just doesn't take an image of the test strip. What it does is there's artificial intelligence and very unique algorithms in the cell phone app that actually allows interpretation and reporting of the result. So, as you've said, there are multiple COVID at-home tests on the market. The one thing that really the cell phone is important for is it gives you a very definitive positive or negative result, digital result right there, on your cell phone display. And that's important because I think for yourself and many of the users or your listeners, you'll have seen these sort of test strips where you're looking at a strip, and is there a line there or not? Is that line? I think I see a faint line. I don't know whether it's positive or not. What we wanted to do with the cell phone is take that subjectivity out of it and really use the algorithms in the sort of camera and the app to be very definitive. So the way we've calibrated the app, the way we've calibrated the cell phone, it takes that subjectivity out. And then, of course, what it then allows also to do is you can then share that result if you want to. So if you're part of a big organization or a schooling system or a company, you can just press send and send that result to your healthcare provider. So we wanted to make it through the cell phone as sort of as smooth and as connected and integrated as possible.
That makes a great deal of sense, especially as we've talked about the at-home tests and the people aren't able really to have, we have nowhere to report any positive cases. So we don't have a true count of how many cases there are. I guess that was my misunderstanding. Is the sharing required with the Veridor, or was it optional? I in reading some write-ups about it, I thought it was more of it was already connected to a place where the positive or negative result would be reported.
So yeah, you can opt in to share the result if you want to share the result. Mm-hmm. Obviously, some companies that are working on sort of testing programs and so on and so forth might have like a company identification number, and you would have an employee or an associate identification number. And again, if you work with your company and they have mandatory reporting requirements, the cell phone and the reporting capability can absolutely do that. What we're able to do through the app, and obviously in a very de-identified and an anonymous way, is we can still look at data to sort of say how many tests have been done on aggregate, how many positives, how many negatives. So again, it just really helps contribute towards the public health problem of really getting a sense of where there is positivity on not positivity, negative COVID tests.
One comment I'll add just quickly is, Tom, to your question, my whole family took Veritor at home test over the holidays as we were bringing a large group together with some elderly folks, and it's on people's cell phones, but no one had to report it. So it's definitely an opt-in type of thing, which I think is part of the beauty of our solution.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Well, I'd like to continue following the cell phone aspect of it, because you acquired Scanwell Health, because the technology that you incorporated into the test. Do you see the cell phone component, the scanning component, being an important part of diagnostic tests going forward?
Great question. And it's interesting because, one of the other benefits of the test, and I think that differentiates the BD test is, and again, for the user, it's got all these embedded videos that take you step by step over a 15-minute cycle of how to do the test properly. So it's all about trying to put the patient or the consumer at ease. But one of the reasons why we went ahead with the Scanwell acquisition, the great team, and they're now a part of BD, is, when you really think about COVID, one of the things, and we sort of talked about it a little bit earlier on, is there probably isn't a person on the planet right now who hasn't heard about a diagnostic test on the back of COVID. Mm-hmm. But what it's also done is, when you look at healthcare systems overall, it's really taught us, particularly at home and point of care, how to manage patients remotely. So so when you look at point of care, there is clearly a growing trend on the role of point of care tests. And yes, we're doing COVID at home right now, but if you also think about it, there are other sorts of tests that people are doing at home right now. I mean, pregnancy test is a good example. There's HIV self-tests and so on and so forth. So we think the trend of at-home and point-of-care testing is just set to continue. But ultimately, if people do more and testing at home, you want to be able to connect that test result into the patient's electronic medical record, into the healthcare system. You might want to be able to connect a patient who has a positive result of whatever test to their healthcare provider. So instrumental for us is the acquisition of Scanwell was not only just about enabling the COVID solution right now, the at-home solution right now, but we actually think it'll be a foundational platform to just do more at-home tests over time.
And before we go into the future, because I'd like to understand where this diagnostic space is headed, focusing on the current situation, I made light of it at the start, the low supply of diagnostics. We've all been sort of scrambling trying to find them. I'm on Facebook all the time with people noting, oh, CVS has it. Oh, Walgreens has them. And I now currently have a supply in my closet, feel safe and secure. But can you provide some insight, both of you, into what was behind the shortage? I mean, we say supply chain for everything, but what does that actually mean? And why have we had such a difficult keeping these on the shelves when I'm reading at least that other countries haven't had the same problems?
Yeah, so again, for COVID, I'll pick up on it. And then if Brooke wants to add to it for broader diagnostics. And honestly, Tom, I'd unpack it a little bit. So obviously, again, as a consumer, even if you think around the holiday time, Christmas time, there was a lot of dialogue and public awareness around supply chain challenges, just trying to get things moved across the globe and so on, and supply chain shortages. We've been very fortunate in that the components that make up the at-home testing kit for BD Veritor, we've had no supply chain challenges to be able to get components for the kit, I think is an important point, number one. But obviously, and really from December, sort of when Omicron in the US really started to take a hold, we have started to see significant demand, as has the industry. So what we're doing right now is we were very targeted and selective as to where our channel would be, where we would sort of make these tests available. And we're ramping up supply and capacity very aggressively. And right now, as we move into it, if required, we have an ability to make up to about 12 million tests per month, as we go forward. But for the contracts that we do have, we're meeting all the contractual commitments that we have right now. And then obviously, as we ramp up capacity, we'll just look to sort of engage more. If people were interested right now, they can learn about the test there's a dedicated website, bdveritor.com. And then purely from an availability perspective, and to your point, it does cycle up and down based on demand, but the test is available online through amazon.com and everlywell.com, and it's available on shelf in Walgreens and Winn-Dixie.
For the rest of the diagnostic portfolio, I'll just say we aren't seeing the same types of challenges because, the demand is up because of COVID and hospitalizations over the past 2 years. So we're still seeing really hot demand for diagnostics beyond COVID, but we're caught up on that and we're basically producing flat out to meet all of that demand. So typical challenges with, I think, supply chain and logistics right now, just getting things moved around. It's a little slower than it was a couple of years ago before the pandemic. So we're seeing some delays from a transportation perspective, but overall pretty good. Definitely not the same type of kind of surges you see with COVID in kind of regular diagnostics.
Interesting. Let's look ahead and hopefully into, if not a COVID-free world, a more manageable world with COVID in it. Where are diagnostics headed? Is this sort of opened up new opportunities? It certainly has opened up new awareness for diagnostics. But how are you looking at the future of the diagnostics business?
First of all, I think that there has been this revelation, right, as Dave kind of touched on changing care settings. And we see it in all types of spaces, but going from diagnostics being predominantly in a lab and then managed by a healthcare professional to being taken care of at home. And so the portfolio, even beyond just COVID, is looking at things like capillary blood collection. And we feel like we've cracked the code on that. So we're pretty excited about that providing being an enabler for some of these new care settings, whether it's retail, diagnostics, or again, at home, things like that. The other thing I think, and I touched on it earlier, is we're really excited about the automation and kind of robotics, automation, AI, all of those solutions we can bring to bear in the lab, because there's still going to be large central labs around the globe processing, a lot of samples and providing a lot of diagnostic results. And so we're excited about that as well, because I think there's going to be a need for both, right? This shift in care, and then also kind of how do you process everything once somebody takes a test at home and potentially sends it in if they need to. So we're excited about that. We have our BD Keystra system, which is really automating microbiology. And then we have our BD Core system, which is molecular. It's a molecular diagnostic tool. So those are a couple of things about which I'm really excited.
How do you plan ahead with COVID still lurking about? I know I've mentioned a COVID-free world or COVID-managed world, whatever you want to call it. We're still vulnerable to these sort of ups and downs and surges and waves. How does that affect running a diagnostics business? How do you manage forecasting? How do you plan resources? It seems to be a really unusual time to be in this business.
One thing I could say is for the non-COVID business of BD, we're just moving forward with our strategies because there's still a compelling need for these solutions that we're bringing. Like I said, we've been launching things. It's actually been a really good past few years, basically, for this business that Dave was running before I got here. So we've continued to innovate there. And then we do have and I think Dave called it a dedicated, really highly skilled group that's focused on COVID. Mm-hmm. And so if we separate it, if I were to have to predict the whole business, including COVID, I would tell you I'd be a failure. That wouldn't work out well. But fortunately, we get to predict the business without COVID. And then the COVID side, we know we're going to have some, wild swings, basically. Dave, do you want to add on to the COVID?
Yeah, but I think you captured it well for the base business. I think there's so much history and resiliency. And the diagnostics portfolio was so broad, you sort of got embedded resiliency. So I think Brooke captured that well. On COVID, what I would say is, honestly, Tom, we have a lot of experience in sort of managing surge capacity. If I think about pre-COVID, the BD Veritor actually is at least the instrument piece, not the at-home, but the prior instrument that we now have one of the COVID tests on is also the platform that we use for flu. So in a respiratory season where you have flu, where you want to be able to diagnose flu A and or flu B, that season can also be very up and down, very volatile, and you don't know what it is. So history will tell you what are the components where you want to just take some inventory, one of the components where you want to sort of get stockpiles in certain areas or whatever. In terms of our manufacturing facilities, we've got a lot of experience around how to manage surge capacity. And then, if the pandemic hits and we've got to shorten and optimize supply chain, again, there's a lot of levers we can pull.
Was that flu test in the works prior to COVID, or is this something that became necessary because you want to be able to discern between one and the other?
So one of the things that BD has is we have a handheld instrument called the BD Veritor, and that's used by healthcare professionals, physician office labs, and that's been doing flu testing for us since 2012.
Sure.
So before we did the at-home test, and when we sensed the need to develop a COVID assay, we quickly developed and released a COVID test for that BD Veritor instrument. Then what we did was we developed a test that could actually do flu and COVID on the same device, but still to be used on the instrument. And then, so we already have that out in the market, so which is very ideal for this season. So if somebody went to their physician or a nurse triage and I've got the sniffles, I've got the temperature on a single test to be able to say, do you have COVID or flu? We already have that available. Then we move to the at-home test as a matter of public health. But, when you look at our website, when you look at some of the information that we've made publicly available, we are actually working on and developing an at-home, what we call an at-home combination test, that would be able to detect flu and COVID in the similar same at-home format with a digital phone app. So that's in development.
Interesting. And Brooke, I was noticing on the report from Analyst Day that I think it was in 2024, you're developing, I believe it was an at-home or hopefully developing an at-home strep test. As a parent, my kids are older now, but man, that would have been helpful 10 years ago. Is that something that's been in the works for a long time? Or again, is that something that we're looking for ways to serve people even if they can't get into a doctor's office?
Yeah, I think what we can say is we're looking for meeting people where they are and moving with the industry. And so we already have a very good respiratory diagnostic portfolio across many of our instruments, similar to what Dave was just talking about. And so at home is just the next generation, in my opinion, of where things are moving. And we really think it's going to make a difference for not only meeting people where they are during a pandemic, but even beyond, because there's a lot of underserved people around the globe. That if we can figure out ways to get these things to them, can we really make a difference? Again, advancing the world of health along with our mission, right? So it's in the works and we're excited about it. If you'll notice from Investor Day, we have a lot of focus on just expanding our menu for all of our instruments. And again, across the lab automation side, which is the big high throughput diagnostic tools we have out there, and then also all the way down to at home.
Fantastic. Well, it's been, I can't imagine, a more unusual couple of years and a more challenging time to start a new job at a high profile position. I appreciate your sharing your stories and for joining me on the podcast.
Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Tom. Good to see you.
All right, well, it's great to hear from Brooke Story and Dave Hickey of BD. And now is the time for our final question of the Device Talks Weekly Trivia. Paul Grant, this is your chance to redeem yourself in the eyes of the Device Talks community. Let us see if you can recall what Chris Newmarker always advises listeners to do right now. The choices are like, follow, subscribe, or is it all of the above?
I'm going to go with all of the above.
That's right.
Like,
what should people
subscribe.
do? There it is.
Follow, subscribe.
Like, follow, subscribe.
Fantastic.
And you can find Chris on LinkedIn at Newmarker, also on Twitter as well, like a Newmarker.
Outstanding, Paul.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic.
And what's my Twitter tag? Can you remember that one, Paul?
Medtech Tom.
There we go. All right. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And where can we find you, Paul? You're quite the active social media feller.
Hey, I am on Twitter as Life Science VC. Life Science VC on Twitter. On LinkedIn, I am Paul Graham. So you can find me there. Easy to find me on LinkedIn. And Medtech Innovator is also on LinkedIn as Medtech Innovator. So that's pretty easy as well. And we're on Twitter as Medtech Awards. So there you go. That's where we'll be on social media. Like, follow, and subscribe.
To all of us.
That's right.
That's right.
So once again, folks, if you have a team and if you have a company and if you have a great idea for MedTech, you need to apply to the Medtech Innovator by February 15th. And what's the website again, Paul?
That would be medtechinnovator.org, Tom.
Right.
And I will tell you one more thing here, everybody, for all the listeners. That one last thing is I don't track the exact numbers, but I feel like if I were to look back at the podcast I've listened to at Device Talks, which I listen to every single one of them, you have, earlier companies, and then you have your big med tech, large cap companies. I'd say at least half of the people who you interview are Medtech Innovator alumni. Some amazing interviews over the Justin Barad with your VR experience, and Jennifer Freed, and many, many, many others who've been on here. You do an incredible job, you and Chris, at celebrating and supporting innovators. And I just want to thank you guys for the work that you do. It makes a huge difference for these companies. So thank you for that support. And again, medtechinnovator.org.
Here you go.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Chris and I have a good time and we'll love for the industry as well. So this is great fun. So folks can help us out. Well, you can help yourself out first. Once again, Medtech Innovator will be at Device Talks Boston, May 10th and 11th. You want to save yourself some dough when you register at devicetalks.com. Use the code DTW, Device Talks Weekly, DTW25. You'll save 25% off the price of the time. That's early bird or regular price, but go now and save lots of money. Register at devicetalks.com. Please do share this podcast on those social media channels that we talked about. And of course, we want folks to, everyone now,
like, follow,
subscribe. And you'll have, if you subscribe to this podcast, you'll have future episodes sent directly to you.
It's a little slower when 3 people are doing it at once.
Yeah, we never even tried it with 2. We went from 1 to 3, so that was pretty bold on our part. But hey, we're innovators in our own right.
Hey guys, thank you for having me on as a guest today. I really enjoyed it. It was a pleasure and an honor, and I hope you'll have me back.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm sure we will. And thank you for being part of Device Talks Boston. We look forward to working with you on the program May 10th and 11th in Boston.
Well, that's a wrap. Take care, everybody. Stay healthy.